So today on Smoothies with Rufus, we got the famous Derek Hansen on with us.
Infamous.
And it, well, that too, I think, especially if you go to breakfast with him one time. And and we're going to talk about a lot of different subjects today. So hopefully we'll have time to get to all of them. If not, hopefully Derek will like us enough where he'll come back and talk to us some more. But Derek, just a quick recap. Tell everybody about you and what you're doing now. And I know you got a new course out, Running Mechanics 2.
Yeah, I have got the level one, which is the basic one, and then the two is like a rehab course mostly, more of like return to play and all that. And then I'm working on, hopefully I have it in the next month, is more of a planning and periodization around sprint training and running. And so that's kind of what I'm working on right now. So, but everything is very sprint centric and running centric and fast running. So I'm trying to stay in my lane.
That's awesome.
Pardon the pun. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm saving up my dinars so I can buy those sometime. So
I'll just send them to you.
Oh, okay. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd appreciate that.
I'll send it to you.
So I wanted to ask you, we got the NFL Combine coming up. And
yes.
I wish you were coming this year.
Well, I probably would again if it wasn't for all this travel nonsense. Like, like I got to give blood at the border and then urine at the hotel or whatever. It's like, really? Maybe it's urine at the border. I can't remember, but yeah.
Really? Oh wow! I'm glad I don't have to travel anymore. Jeez. Yeah. This is so good. I stay in my house, and if I don't feel like leaving, I just sit here all day.
The traveling's overrated.
Is it? Yeah. So let me ask you about the combine. I don't know how to say this out, but what do you think of the tests that they do in the combine? I mean, I have my opinion, but it's pretty simplistic. I mean, are they really testing things that need to be tested, or?
I think a lot of it is just testing to see if people have done their due diligence and have done some preparation, and just like any test, right? There's no, like, my son did his driving test and he failed a couple of times, and we're like, what's going on, buddy? But he and he can drive. Like, we drive with him all the time. He's a very good driver, but there's things you have to do in the test that maybe you won't even encounter in real life driving, right? So I think the combine is kind of like that too. It's just a test, and like, have you prepared for the test? It's almost like an obedience test, right? But obviously you want to see people run fast. That gives you an indicator. If somebody's a wide receiver and he runs 5 seconds, probably won't be a great wide receiver in the NFL. If he runs 4.6, like Cooper Kupp, well, that's fast enough. He's proven that that's fast enough. So I think if you're smart and you're a general manager or a head coach and you're looking at players, obviously the first thing you're going to look at is their game film. And then you're going to find out, how many previous convictions they've had or whatever, do all your homework on their, what kind of character they have. And then you'll go to the combine and go, okay, yeah, he did okay in the test. Check, right? And there'll be the odd guy who runs like 4.2 in the 40 and you've never seen him catch a pass. You might go, well, we'll invite him to camp. I don't know. So it's I think if you're intelligent, you kind of just know what to look for. And I don't know if there's a physical test that you could come up with that would be a good indicator of somebody's ability to succeed in professional football. So I don't know. I think it would have to be a combination of, intellectual tests around like reading the defense, reading the offense, whatever, you got to make sure people understand that. And then just, like I said, the basic character things. Are they a good teammate? Are they going to be able to handle the pressures around being a professional athlete in the NFL? And, and we always see those cases where people, you find out that they can't, right?
Mhm.
You know, unfortunately, a lot of them play for the Raiders, but you know,
Somehow they make it work, or they used to.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it depends on the people around you and all that too. So it's, I guess the best I can say about the NFL Combine is it's just another way to kind of throw some things at the athletes and see how they handle it, right? Without getting too caught up in the specifics.
So do they really look at the results of that test? I mean, running to a cone and then cutting seems kind of counterproductive to me. You know, I don't know how much you can, I
Again,
don't know how much you can tell about that.
if somebody's horrible at it, it may bring up, like, I think what happens is, like, you look at the test and then you go back, okay, let's go look at their film again. Let's look at their the football side of things, and make sure, you know, we didn't miss something. But I don't think if you trip over a cone in the agility test and have a bad time, if you scored, you know, 20 touchdowns in your college career in your final year, they're going to overlook certain things, right? So I don't know. It's, you know, a lot of, like, the one thing I found interesting when I went to the NFL Combine on several occasions was a lot of the strength coaches don't really go and watch any of the tests, and the team doesn't really ask them their opinion.
Really?
Yeah, which I found interesting, right? You know, the combine's going on and all the strength coaches are at the bar or whatever, right? So right there, you kind of wonder, like, okay, well, why do we have these tests if, like, the physical conditioning coach isn't there as their primary assessment person? Right? Because you would have the offensive coaches watching the receiver drills, you'd have the O-line coach watching the O-line drill, right? So why wouldn't you have the strength coach at every, you know, see every test and have a report? But that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So it's,
Yeah. So
there's a lot of things in professional sport in the NFL that I wouldn't say make a lot of sense, but, you know, it just still happens, right? Like,
sounds like a case having too much money and not knowing what to do with it, right?
yeah, or you have players that, you know, are good specifically at whatever they're supposed to do, but they're not good at a lot of other things. So they're good at running a pattern and catching a pass or blocking somebody or kicking a field goal. But, you know, that's why they're playing. It's not because they can do a power clean or,
Right.
you know, pass the FMS or whatever, even though they'll still run them through it. Like, I don't think anybody's, you know, again, if you're a good player and you fail the FMS at the combine, who cares, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and you haven't been injured, you know. So I think the one thing I attended was the medicals, and that was interesting because they were pretty much going through everybody's history with a fine-tooth comb, and they have 2 trucks in the convention center there that are MRI, portable MRI facilities, so that if you have a question about anybody, all right, let's go out to the truck and let's get an MRI like that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a bigger thing, is doing sort of the psychological evaluation and the medical evaluation, because you know whether or not they're a decent player, from what's happened previously. So it's an interesting event. Like, I wish I was there so I could have breakfast with you, but
That was awesome. That was awesome.
yeah, that was a great time. And but after a while, you're kind of like, okay, I kind of seen all of this, and it's cool on some level. It's just nice to see people, right? And I think that's what it ended up being, is like, oh, you get to see all these people and that you haven't seen together in one room. And the strength coaches usually have a dinner, a banquet. So it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, I was a little shocked the first time, and then the second time you're like, yeah, whatever. This is how it is.
I really wish I could have heard you speak. That would have been I would have ruined you and Rob. I thought that would have been really interesting to me when you guys.
Yeah, well, even that experience is interesting because you know, they bring you in to speak because I guess for some reason somebody thinks you know something or you're an expert or whatever. And then there's very few questions. There's very little follow-up from people
Really?
receiving the presentation. Like you might get one question, two.
Really?
Yeah, it's a weird vibe. Like you just do your presentation and they escort you out, right? And you're like, okay. And then maybe somebody will come talk to you in the lobby later if you run into them of the hotel. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Wow. Jeez. Well, that let me ask you this. This is going to lead into another question I got. But do you see many guys? I know you're big on hamstring injuries and things. Do you see a lot
I
of those?
love hamstring injuries.
I don't know if you love them so much, but I know you talk about them a lot.
Yeah.
And different things. Do you see a lot of those at the NFL Combine?
Not so much. I mean, you will see people strain. Like I think the 40s are one of the earlier tests. And so what happens is somebody will strain and then it kind of, makes them miss some of the other stuff afterwards, right? So very common to see calf strains or hamstring strains, and then their combine is essentially done after that. So, I don't think it happens a lot, but it certainly happens. You'll see it, you'll watch the 40s live and you'll see, rarely do you see it like in the middle of the run, but usually they finish the run and then they kind of grab their hamstring and then you can see, okay, they're not going to take another one. They're done. But very rarely have I seen somebody like fall down and blow up in the middle of the run.
Right.
But yeah, I think it does happen. But if they've prepped properly and they've warmed up properly, it shouldn't happen. Or maybe stress gets to the athlete, the anxiety and all that, and that can create problems. But it's a pretty predictable environment. So
what do you think? I think you kind of hit on it, but what do you think causes that for them to do that? I mean, I know you talk a lot about running at maximal speed or maximal velocity. Do you think that some of that's they just haven't run it at that velocity very often?
Yeah, I think so. I think, especially once you're in the league, you don't have to run a 40 ever again, right? So you run it at the combine. It's kind of like, some of the tests you see for like law enforcement in the fire department. You're like, okay, like they have this rigorous test that they have to do to get in the fire department, but nobody gives a damn after they've made it in the fire department. You got all these fat guys, trying to get in the truck. So I think, there is a tendency for people to kind of get away from running at max speed because it does take some effort and there's some risk involved. So if you're doing that, you're probably going to be pretty good. Whereas if you haven't done, say you've just, run routes, which aren't necessarily at max velocity, and they usually bundle them up in like a lot of reps. So you might do like 30, 40 reps in a practice or in a session, maybe more, and usually just walk back and you do another one, walk back. So that in there, limits your output if you have so many reps and so little recovery. So then you don't get to hit those higher velocity zones. And then, you don't have that, you don't get to use the what is it? The Aaron Rodgers term. You're not inoculated for speed, right? So I think, I think that people get away from that. And so that one time when you have to make that play in the game, when it's a little farther and somebody's chasing you or you're chasing somebody down, that's usually when things fall apart and you will strain.
Corey and I were talking earlier. What's the difference between a max velocity sprint and a max 10-meter sprint? So I see you starting out with a lot of these shorter sprints.
Yeah. Well, by virtue of the fact that you're accelerating only 10 meters, which is usually 10 yards, 10 meters, around 6 or 7 steps. And most of the research kind of shows that you're lucky to get to about 70% of your max speed
Right.
by 10 meters, maybe 65 to 70%. So your speed doesn't get high enough because you just don't have enough distance to accelerate. It's like, for a plane to take off, you need a certain amount of runway length. It's not going to take off in, 100 yards. It's going to need almost a kilometer or whatever the distance is to really get up to speed. So the same thing applies. If you're only doing 10-yard sprints all the time, you're probably going to hit 15 miles per hour when you need to get over 20 miles per hour. So you need that extra distance to hit those higher velocities. And if you aren't running farther, 20, 30 yards, 40 yards, you won't get near max velocity. And so you'll be missing that exposure.
Right. So so let's say for a lineman, okay, an offensive lineman. So do you still do max velocity sprints at, longer distance, 100 meters or something in the course of training?
Theoretically, no. Like theoretically, you're going to spend most of your time in that 10-yard, maybe 20-yard range, like practically, because, those guys don't really have to get out and run that far. Having said that, a lot of the time it depends on how much time you have to prepare. So if I have 16 weeks and I have a 320-pound lineman that I'm working with, I'm going to use that time and I'm going to get them out a little farther. They might go 30, 40, maybe they go 50. If they have good technique and they've been working with me for a while, why not get that exposure, maybe not 60, but certainly up to 40, because they'll hit a higher velocity. And we know that higher velocity creates greater stress. You need more ground force, vertical ground force. We know it's a shorter ground contact time. So there's going to be sort of this trickle down effect of doing that, right? It would be like saying, why are you squatting 500 pounds when, we don't have to do that in a game? Well, you're doing it for the stress of all of that weight loading through your spine and your body, and that creates some resiliency and some general strength that transfers to other things. I would say it's the same with sprinting. Like if you're going to run farther than what you need, what actually happens in the game, you're doing it for general systemic reasons in terms of absorbing that stress and that load so that you are generally stronger. And also you have the ability to, if needed, call upon that ability. Right. If the play goes the other way and you got to tackle somebody, or you pick up a loose ball and you want to run it in for a touchdown, right? So
this may sound stupid, but does it in some way help with your acceleration, like getting off the ball and things like that?
I think so. Like, again, like I posted something on Instagram the other day where it shows, it basically shows the force plate analysis over 60 yards that was done in Japan. And the farther that the sprinter runs, the more vertical force, like the waves are bigger, right? They're putting more force on the ground. So if you're creating more force because you're running farther, that's going to feed back to your ability to get off the line and accelerate in the first few steps, right? It's like adding just general ability in terms of force, power, elasticity, that's going to make it easier to get off the line. So I think, it's no different than, looking at a race car. A typical, what we'll talk about, Indy 500 car will have like 1,000 horsepower engine. And it can go 0 to 60 miles per hour in 2 seconds, 2 point whatever seconds. But it can also hit whatever, 180 miles per hour, 200 miles per hour, 200 plus miles per hour. So if you're going 200 miles per hour, you have enough horsepower to get you off the line in 2 seconds to get to 60. So I think it's this, you're working both ends, right, of that spectrum to get faster off the line, but also faster at top speed. I think it's related.
So that would apply to a basketball player also?
I would think so.
Same type of thing.
Yeah. Like, somebody like Allen Iverson, was definitely a very fast athlete. Like, and if he ran track, he probably would have been really good at track. We know he was good at football. And you could see some of his, yeah. And he was very, very quick at basketball. And then I remember watching that the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, and they were saying he ran a 40-yard dash in such and such a time. It was pretty fast. And, there were basketball coaches hand timing it. So who knows, but he was probably pretty fast too. Yeah. Right. And I know somebody who had worked, done some sprint training for Derek Rose, and he was fast, right? They go, wow, he looks like a sprinter. Right. So I think, if they're quick in basketball, that they have ability. And then I watched Marion Jones. There was a 30 for 30 on her. And I guess after she finished her track career and was booted out of track, she eventually went back to the WNBA and made it in the WNBA, at an advanced age. So, having those abilities will help you in those sports.
I got one more question. I know Corey's got some questions, but while we're talking about this, I love seeing that big kid run. I don't know what his name is. The great big lineman kid you have.
Herschel.
Herschel. What a great name.
Like 325, like 16 years old. Yeah.
It seems to me he gets off the way you want him to so well for as big as he is. How tall is he?
I think he's about 6'5", 6'4", 6'5", right? So he's a big kid, right? And when we first started, and his parents were good athletes. I think his father was a good wrestler, and his mom did track, right? And they're not small people either. So he's got some ability in there, and he does the Olympic lifts, right? They have a gym at home and he does them. And but there were some coordination issues around getting off the line and just coordinating his limbs properly and just getting his arms to fire properly. And so we started with him back in probably June, I would say, last June. And just over time, he's gotten better just by putting in the work. And just one thing for him is because he's so tall and big, getting him to come out at the right angle,
right,
and apply that force. So he's got some horizontal as part of that too, was a big thing. He would just sort of run tall, and then moving that much weight and height in a tall position is difficult, right? You're not using the right gear or right muscles. So it's like trying to start at a third gear rather than first gear. So getting him, like we did a lot of banded starts where we said, okay, I want you to fall as deep as you can, and then wait, and then go. And just him finding that posture was the big missing link in taking his horsepower and converting it in the right way. So I think, if you don't resolve that at a relatively young age, it doesn't become automatic, and then it's harder and harder as they get older. We spent a lot of time on just that departure angle and getting off the line with good posture and coordinating the limbs, and it's finally coming together. So I thought
even before the football season, I think it looked like he'd improved so much. Was that 2 or 3 months you had him or something?
Yeah. And one way we judge it is like before, when he used to run, say he ran 20 yards and then he'd turn on the brakes and then shut down, he would stop very quickly because he didn't have as much velocity. Now, when he runs his 20 or 30 yards or whatever, and he shuts it off, he carries quite far because he's got so much momentum heading in the right direction. So that's how I assess it too. Sometimes is I just watch him, and
that's interesting. Like, wow,
he's moving, right? And then he's got so much speed behind him that it takes him probably about the same distance to slow down. So if he takes 30 yards to get up to speed, it'll take him 30 yards to decelerate safely.
How much? I know he trains with your son, right?
And we have a group that's young.
Your son's a wide receiver, or
yep.
Yeah. So how much different does his program look than what your son does, or is it pretty much kind of the same thing, especially early on?
Yeah, early on. Right now, we're spending. And the other part of it is like we do some of our work indoors in a facility that's only about 25 yards long. Right. So everybody's working on their first 10 to 15 yards. because that's really what we have at our disposal.
Mhm.
And you can't, if they're good athletes, if they try and accelerate farther than 10 or 15 yards, they're going to smash into the wall at the end of the facility, right? So we're doing resisted runs, we're doing some variations on starts, but we're really basically accumulating a lot of short accelerations right now. And then last week we got outside a bit because the weather improved, but now it's cold again, so we've got to regroup. And hopefully in a couple of weeks we'll be back outside and we can run a bit farther. But yeah, it's I would say right now very similar. My son's going to start running track soon in March, so we're going to have to start lengthening out his runs, where I'll probably keep that lineman kid, O-line kid, probably over 20 to 30. But for my son, we got to go 60, 80, 100, 120, 150 out to 200. So
But that's more because he's running track, right?
yeah.
So what would it look like if he wasn't running track? Would you? I
I
mean, you
probably
got
spent a lot of time out to 60 yards, 60 meters.
with your son as
Yeah.
opposed to Herschel.
Herschel probably 30 to 40.
Yeah, okay.
And the only reason we take him out to 40 is he's probably got to do some like camps where he's got to run a 40.
Oh, okay.
Right, just for those purposes. But
is he getting some looks from colleges?
I think so. For somebody that size and who can move, I think he'll probably looking at some sort of Div 1 scholarship at some point. So
go ahead, Corey. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. I actually have a question off that. Like when you're teaching, especially kids, these skills, do you find that it's more of like they're actually lacking the strength and power to get into these positions, whether it's acceleration or max velocity? Or is it more just like kind of feeding them the right environment and the right like exercises and constraints to teach them how to get in, to like learn those skills and get into those positions themselves?
I'd say it's a bit of both, because you could argue that yes, they haven't had as much of a good strength program, or they're just starting. But then I'll have kids who are been more like weightlifting guys, and they come out and they have some of the same problems. Like even though they might be strong in the weight room, like squatting 450 pounds for high school kids is pretty good. But when they get onto the track or when they get on the field to sprint, they'll try to use that same strength, and it'll kind of constrain them because they're so tight and they don't relax, and they don't have they can't generate the same velocity, so sometimes you have to teach them how to relax and achieve the position with technique and not strength. So sometimes it's strength, but sometimes strength can be a bit of a problem too. It depends on the situation. And I just assume everybody needs to work on these things, especially at the high school level. Like, if I were in charge, I would probably say, like, we're just going to do all of our work on the field. We'll spend another 30 minutes in the weight room and just hit probably like your basic 3 lifts, some sort of pull, some sort of press, some sort of squat, and then we get out of there. But I see nowadays, like, there's so many exercises in the weight room that people are doing, and it's like, geez, like, I could use that time to make them move better on the field and get them running faster. And as we know, if you improve those things, you get stronger in the weight room too. So whereas if we're doing single leg lunges and all these other ridiculous exercises ad nauseum, it doesn't make them faster. It just doesn't. I don't care what anybody says, right? So I think you really got to budget your time appropriately and see what's in front of you and go, okay, let's try and solve most of this outside on the field, and then bolster it with some good strength training work that'll allow for some transfer of ability.
Rufus, do you want to follow up with that? I know you probably got some.
No, I was just going to say, so what does your typical weight training, assuming for your son, what does that look like in conjunction with your running or your sprinting?
We're just focusing on basic stuff, like how to pull from the floor, how to pull from different heights, like below the knee, above the knee, hip, whether it's like, I don't have great ceiling height in here, so we can't do a lot of overhead stuff, snatches and all that. But, you know, when he gets to a different gym, we will do some overhead work. But I would say it's mostly pulling from the floor, making sure his power clean is good, the technique is good, and the bar velocity is good. And then, you know, bench press or some sort of, you know, variation of overhead press, and front squat and back squat. You know, I mean, do we do single leg stuff? In the weight room, not much, which people like freak out, like, you don't do single leg stuff in the weight room, right? And it's like, well, I don't know, we're doing bounding and jumping and hopping, and we're doing a lot of single leg stuff outside. So I don't really understand what the issue is there, especially if they're, you know, we'll do like split jerks and, you know, split cleans and split snatches and all that stuff. So they'll get some split work, right? But I'm not doing, like I said, I'm not doing it ad nauseum. Like, you know, he walks upstairs with single legs and he does, you know, whatever, like it's going to get covered with all the other stuff we're doing. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Now you're making me think. I'm sorry about this conversation.
Well, I mean, I was always taught, like, you know, we try to generate as much strength and power in the weight room, which a lot of time is bilateral, right? Because it's stable. And then, you know, if I can do, you know, like I said, if I could do a 450-pound squat, well, that's going through my spine, right? Whereas, can I do a 450-pound single leg squat? Not the same way, not the same, you know. So that now I have to lower that, so less weight's going through the system, right? But then when I go outside, I can now work faster and, you know, create more power and more velocity through my single legs. But I've gained all of that, you know, strength from doing the bilateral stuff, and now I can apply it unilaterally outside. And so I've never, whereas when I was younger, when I was in college, I did long jump and triple jump, you know, again, single leg exercises, right? And whenever we did a lot of unilateral stuff in the weight room, everybody got SI joint problems. Because it becomes an overuse issue, right? If we're doing a lot of hopping and bounding and, you know, stair bounds and sprinting and jumping, I'm jumping off of one leg. The last thing you need is more unilateral work in the weight room. So.
No, that makes perfect sense. Now that you explain it that way, I think. Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah.
Also, it's like way more specific from like a timing and coordination aspect too, because there is like the timing aspect of power where you've got to create that force in a given window. So if you're just doing single leg work in the gym, you're probably less likely to actually like have that transfer over when you're doing like your sprint work.
Yeah, like the ground contact time on a world-class long jump is like, you know, 14/100ths of a second, or a high jump's like maybe a little longer, right? So, you know, whereas a single leg squat, what's that, like 2 seconds, or, you know, I don't know, it's not even the same universe. So I think you got to be careful. And I'm not saying don't do single leg stuff. I'm just saying, like, don't make it the focus of your program in the weight room, right? You know, we'll still do circuits and we'll do those types of things, step ups and lunges, but I'm not doing like really heavy exercises on those ones, because there's more risk, there's more inherent risk, and there's less payoff for that risk, right? So it's just something that philosophically that's what I do.
How what's your week? How do you divide up the week then with your son? Do you do sprint and weightlift on the same day, or you do them other days, or
sometimes we do, but right now that we've just kind of separated out, because with his school commitments and everything, it's tougher, right? So he'll do his lift at school because they've got a decent facility, and then we'll sprint on other days, right? So he might lift 3 times a week, and then we sprint 2 to 3 times a week outside, and then we'll try to get some sort of conditioning work in as well. But it's tough right now because it's just, one, the weather is not great, so it's a little less flexible in terms of facility access. And once things do get nicer outside, then we have a little more flexibility to do things a little more the way I would do it. But ideally, I would probably have him sprint and then go lift after, and then do conditioning work and skill work probably on the off days. So if we did Monday, Wednesday, Friday, sprint, then lift, right? And then on the off day, do tempo running, do med ball circuits, general conditioning, maybe some skill work related to football. I don't know, on those days. So that's probably how I'd organize it.
Well,
Go ahead,
Derek,
Corey.
yeah, can we go back to this idea of like someone's in the weight room, they're just learning to create a lot of like muscle activity, just a lot of recruitment, and then need to go out and sprint and they have trouble like being relaxed and loose and fluid. Like, what are some ways you're building that into your programs to get people to kind of to learn how to be able to do that when they're moving quickly?
I think the biggest thing, like everybody thinks like, oh, we're going to go sprint today. So everybody's like, like, let's go 100%, right? Like, well, no, you can do a lot of productive work at submaximal intensity. So you can put a ceiling on things and you say like, listen, everything we're doing today, I want you to work at like 85 to 90%. And I always say 85 to 90 because 90 sounds too close to 100. So if you say 85%, they're like, okay, well, that's not full out. But it still seems like enough. So I'll be really sort of specific about that intensity and that submaximal intensity. So we carry out everything. And then when somebody's doing something at submaximal intensity, it's easier to go in and say like, okay, put your hands here, drop your shoulders, loosen up your jaw, right? But if you're going 100%, it's very hard to get any sort of compliance around your coaching. It's just like, it'd be like putting somebody at their max for power clean and say, we're going to do technique work now, which, doesn't work well. So I think that's what I'm trying to do with the coaching is obviously we do drills, which have a technical component to it, and they're a little slower and they're usually in the upright position. But once we start running, I'll purposely make things submaximal. And with acceleration, we'll do like runs uphill, or we'll do it with resistance or a sled. And sometimes that helps too, because it does slow things down. Like when you're pulling a sled, you're not going to run at 100% of your normal speed. So adding that resistance, while some people think it'll make them stronger and more powerful. Usually for me, it slows things down so they can rehearse technique and digest it better, which not a lot of people talk about. They're all about like, let's just move more weight. So I think there has to be some some semblance of rehearsal work, I guess you call it. And I think that's probably something that's overlooked a lot of the time, right? Like Rufus had mentioned, that somebody else's sprint program, right, that we were talking about before we got on. And I think that's some of the problems with those types of approaches. If it's like, let's go 100% all the time, things are going to get missed technically and from a relaxation point of view. So I would say you can't go at 100% all the time. You got to slow things down and kind of eke out some of these technical elements and these subtle finer points of like relaxation and stuff that it's hard to quantify.
Well, that's a really cool point, especially with the like sled pulls sprints, just with the longer ground contact times, and it forces probably whoever is running to really think like, oh, if they start to go too fast and use too much like muscle recruitment, they'll probably naturally feel themselves slowing down. So is it kind of like a self-selecting way without you having to coach anything to like get them to learn how to like stay relaxed, stay fluid, get a better push, things like that, without have to do much coaching with it?
Yeah, really talk a lot about in my courses, like you have to understand a concept of like the point of diminishing returns. Like, so if your intensity goes up too much, right, there's going to be a drop in performance because again, all those things you mentioned, relaxation, tightness, maybe you're just like, just generating too much activity in your brain, too much noise, and it's distracting you from what you should really be focusing on. So I think I want people to understand that you can push too hard. You can work at too high an intensity to get sort of the maximum. It's like a golf swing, right? Like, that people can go up there and really put 100% in their golf swing, but what's the chance that ball is going to stay in the fairway? So you take a little bit off, and now I have control, and now I can hit the ball farther and more accurately. So I think that's a good analogy. Like, yes, it's about club head speed, but it's not about your absolute maximum without focusing on the ball, right? So that's what I try to do with the running.
So what are your parameters for this weight on the sled that you're pulling? How do you judge that?
I mean, a lot of people use it like, well, it should be this much of your body weight, but most of the time I'm trying to get them, we use the roughly like be within 10% of your best time. So if you have somebody running 4 seconds for a certain distance with a sled, then, an extra 10% would be whatever the weight is, you run about 4.4, right? So using time is probably a little better than using some sort of arbitrary body weight, 10% of your body weight, or, I mean, that, who knows what that could be, right? For stronger people, it might not be enough. For weaker people, it might be too much. So using some sort of time parameter, I think, is very useful, because if you just use weight, like we would use like those dragging sleds on the track, the metal dragging sleds. And then I think one day we were doing some timing, and it just finished raining. And so you're like, okay, oh, look, that we found the weight that we want. It's like 25 pounds per sled or whatever it is, right? And then of course the next day we come out, it's a dry day, right? And then we put the 25 pounds on, everybody looks like shit. Right? It's like, oh wait, the coefficient of friction is different, right? So you got to factor in these things, right? And then if you put that same sled onto a turf field, it slides a lot easier too. So depending on the type of turf. So I think that's why the time measurement is very important, because you can't go by load, or sometimes the sled's different. Sometimes it's one of the sleds which the whole bottom touches the ground. Sometimes it has 2 rails, now they have these things that are like sandbags that people drag, or so it's so hard to quantify those things unless you're just looking at time. It's nice if you have you can just use a stopwatch if you're good with it. But you can have like lasers and different electronic timers, and you just look at, you're like, okay, that's fast enough. So we know that sled is probably about the right weight. And then after you do it a couple of times, you kind of know. But yeah, it's good to time things once in a while and just get a sense of it. And then you can see things physically too. If somebody looks like they're on the ground way too long, or they're crossing their midline, or their technique is going to crap, then you got to cut things off too. Either you lighten up the sled, or you just stop doing the resisted work altogether. But you have to have, you have to be monitoring things pretty closely.
Do you ever push sleds? I mean,
Not
I don't
for
know why
speed.
you would.
Not for speed. Yeah, not for speed, because then usually the pushing sled, people tend to load it a lot heavier. And then I'm such a big proponent of getting the arms coordinated with the lower body that the last thing I want to do is lock their arms up onto something. And
Right.
I work with bobsleigh for quite a few years, and I know that when they were doing a lot of pushes with the bobsleigh, they would get a lot of adductor problems, because they don't have that counter rotation with their arms, so they're locked in, so their
Right.
hips don't get to rotate as much, and so they get adductor strains and all that. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna stay away from that. There's no reason why you can't use the pushing sled for strength work, but I as soon as you start moving faster, I just found I didn't like the result. So yeah,
I don't, at least in my area, I don't hear a lot of guys pulling sleds as opposed to pushing them. They always want to push them, right? They want
to this is like some sort of shopping
that?
cart mentality or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. And they want to load it real heavy, and so I thought you're doing this to, get faster. And with a little kid, it works, right? And
yeah. For somebody who's out of shape, it'll work.
Yeah, because anything you do works, right?
Yeah.
With that age group.
Jump up and down 100 times. Oh, that worked.
Yeah,
That's my
yeah, exactly. And all of a sudden, my vertical's gone up the next day if I'm
Yeah.
not sore. But that's interesting. So whatever distance, then you would time it, and then say, okay, do 10% less or 10% of that speed, right?
Yeah, 10% slower would be, acceptable.
Yeah.
Assuming there's no biomechanical errors there that come out of it. But yeah, I think you want to be in that sort of ballpark. And it's not that heavy. Like it should, when I put that weight on somebody, it shouldn't look that much different than an unresisted sprint.
Okay.
Really. So as soon as it starts looking odd, you're like, maybe that's too much weight. So
what's the difference between, I see you pulling with the bands or they're pulling the bands and then pulling the sled. I mean, are you kind of
doing the bands? I'm pretty careful about the bands. Like we don't really go over 5 to 10 yards just because for that reason, like, then you got to start running with the athlete, like after the first couple of steps, right? We use it for, starts, first 3 steps and just getting them into that over position. But, and we use it a lot more in the early part of the planning phase, the general preparatory phase. But as soon as we get to running, 30, 40 yards and all that, we pretty much get away from a lot of the resisted work.
How far out do you pull the sled then?
Maybe 20 or 30 yards.
Oh, is that all? Okay.
Yeah. Because as soon as they get into the upright position,
right,
it's just, it will start to pull them back, and it's just hard to it's just hard on the hamstrings and all that. So it's mostly for acceleration, right? Because when you get up to top speed, you should have a pretty short ground contact time. We don't want anything, lengthening that.
So shoulder harness or waist strap?
Usually waist.
Waist.
Yeah, closer to the hips. Because again, the shoulder harness will restrict your upper body fluidity as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So I just like it from more the midline and center line, close to the hips.
And all this is in your course. Running Mechanics 1.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So it's pretty. We do a whole thing on acceleration and resisted work, and and the whole point is like we're trying to make people have better technique, and we're not trying to overload them. Yes, you want to load them, but a lot of time you're going to load them with repetition, and intensity, which is the farther you make them go, the higher the velocity goes, and that's part of the loading sort of plan too, or protocol too. But we're certainly not trying to overload them too much. It's
right.
we want them to feel sharp. We want them to feel like they can hit positions easily. And I mean, having that flexibility and mobility is so important.
Right. So you're giving them a pretty good rest then in between, because you are focusing more on the technique, right?
Yeah, I would say usually a rough guide would be about 1 minute per 10 yards traveled. So if they're running a 40, you give them at least 4 minutes. If it's a hot day and everybody's moving really well, then we might give them 6 to 8 minutes between, from maximal 40s, right? Sure. So, the idea would be like you want them to recover so that they can reproduce the same speed on the next rep and the next rep, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, what's the point of running if we're going to run it 0.2 of a second slower? Like, we're not making progress here. So, reproducibility is important, and accumulation of those reps.
Go ahead.
When you're doing more max velocity work, are you scaling the distance based on like how well they can maintain output for a certain distance, I guess? like, is there diminishing returns if they're sprinting, if you're doing max velocity work and they're sprinting too far and like their form breaks down and their output and they're just not there and they're slowing down?
Yeah, I mean, it again, it depends on the context. So if you're working with like a younger athlete, a kid, a high school kid, you may need them to run that distance to just to get in shape from an energy system point of view. You know, you're trying to control as much of the biomechanics as possible, but you could see their hips drop and they break down and they start running like this, right? And while you don't want to do too much of that, that still has to be part of the process, right? Getting them into shape.
Right.
Whereas if you're working with a very, very elite level person, you're going to be a lot more careful with that. And they'll know how to self-regulate too. But you don't want to be running miles, extra distance, inefficiently, because that will, create bad habits.
You want to just push them over the edge just a little bit.
Just enough. Yeah. Right. It's no different than technical weightlifting, right? Like, yes, you want to be able to pull from the floor heavier and faster, but if that posture breaks, then that's really not going to be of a big help to us when we get into a competition. So yeah, you're trying to control for all these technical elements as much as possible, but they have to put in the work too. So you're just trying to balance that off.
Yeah. Go ahead, Corey.
Well, do you have any more follow-ups on this?
Well, I got one more. So you did speed training with your son during the football season?
In season?
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
we did.
Yeah. What was that like, and how did the football coach react to that? Because I'm assuming you had to do it after
we
practice.
Didn't consult with the football coach.
That's the best way. See, Corey, I always tell you, just go ahead and do it and let them figure it out afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, they're supposed to be an expert in what they do, not what I do. But we just found situations where if he didn't do as many reps in a game, or it was an easier game or whatever, and the weather was nice, like, hey, let's get out and put some more runs in. Because I know, we would do some GPS tracking of him in games, and you might get one run on a kickoff return or something like that, where he gets up to a decent speed over 20 miles per hour, but that's not happening often, right? Whereas I can take him to the track. We took him to the track the other day, put on the GPS, and he was at almost 21.5 miles per hour in like it was below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So I know if I take him to the track, he's going to run faster than anything he can do on the football field in a game or a practice.
Right.
So that's why we would do it, because I know he can get some benefit from running faster and having that under his belt, for resiliency and also maintaining his fitness. So I think there's value in doing that. Now, at the NFL level, it's harder because the practices take more of their energy. And the head coach obviously has more control over everything they do. And like, we need to do this many reps. And so it's harder for a strength coach to come in and say, okay. And the other thing is, like, you were dealing with professional athletes. The last thing you want to do is say, hey, we're going to go run 340s now, right? They're like, piss off. So in my case, with my son, I have a little bit more pull with him, and we've been doing it for a while, so he knows what I'm going to ask of him and trust me and all that stuff. But ideally, you would want to do that. Like, if you had a player playing and he doesn't get a lot of passes thrown to him and he doesn't get as many reps as you would have liked, sure. Or you have a bye the next week, sure, why wouldn't you want to get in there and get a few more reps under his belt?
I like the idea, and I was really fascinated by it when I was following it, during the season. When did you do that? The day after the game, a couple days after the game, or did you have kind of?
If it was a Friday game, we'd try to go out Sunday.
So give him a day rest and then go.
Yeah. You know, because the and some of it isn't like rest because he's run these great times or ran these great velocities in the game, because like, you know, if you know football, it's like this long drawn out affair. Like you got to show up before the game, like 4 hours before the game, and I don't know, polish your helmet or whatever the hell they do. And then, you know, and then they do all this rehearsal leading up to the game, and like, which I find interesting. Like it's like it almost seems like it's overkill because everybody's so insecure, and but it's just, that's just how it's done. Like that's how it's done everywhere. Like you know, I've been to different universities, I've been to different pro teams, and you kind of look at the schedule in high school now, everybody's schedule looks the same. Like this is what we do first, this is what we do, this, you know, it follows the same script.
Yeah.
Because nobody's got the balls to say like, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. Like, you know, so I mean, I know that rehearsal is important, but it's a little much sometimes, because there were a couple of times when you get your kid out there and it's like freezing cold out, and all the kids are like wet and soaking wet from rain and freezing cold because they're standing out there doing drills that you'll never see in the game or whatever, or plays. And it's like, wait a minute, like there is a point of diminishing returns for this too. So I don't know. Nobody wants to listen to me though. It's like, what do you know?
I don't understand that, because you spent the whole week, you know, doing this thing, and
let's just do more of it.
Yeah.
You
know, I mean, it's supposed to be done. There's no coaching can be done.
I know. Right? Well, that's the thing. If you give a football coach, like if you invented 2 more days of the week, they would take it up with more practice, right?
Oh,
like,
sure. Yeah.
So it's yeah. I mean, and we know from anything, like, you know, if you do an hour lecture in university or you do a 3-hour lecture, which one's going to work better? Probably the hour. You'll retain more, and after 20 minutes, you're just like,
yeah.
So I would think football coaching or football practice is kind of the same.
It's the exact same thing.
So
you know, the more. So it's like here in Indiana, they just made a rule where you can actually start football practice like the 1st of February now. Now we don't have games till the end of August, right? But you can go out in shoulder pads and helmets and practice. So you got to be kidding me. Are we this stupid? You know?
Yeah, it's, you know, and I think there's other things you can do. Probably, like you could probably still have them review film, and you could have them work on individual skills. But yeah, they're trying to run the same full damn practice all year round.
Yeah, and all they're doing is running plays. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, how long does it take you to put in an offense or a defense at the high school level? You know, I understand the pro is a lot more complicated, or college is a lot more complicated. High school level is not that complicated, right? And I know when I first started coaching, you had 3 weeks to install everything because you couldn't practice up till then, you know. And when I played too, I think we had 3 weeks, maybe 4, I can't remember. But you know, now it's, God dang, I got 6 months to install all this, and we're just going to do it over and over and over again. God,
yeah, we're just going to add more plays, right, to the playbook, and it's like, wow, now we have 150 plays that we do really mediocre or crappy, when we should probably have 10 really good ones that we do, right? You know,
exactly. You know. Go ahead, Corey. Take us in another direction.
I just had one more question, because it's about triple extension, especially in like the first step in acceleration. Because I know, like, especially early on when I was coaching, I was always like striving to get someone to like get that triple extension position. And then I started looking more at the next couple steps after that, and that a triple extension would look really good, then the next couple steps would be atrocious. And so I'm kind of wondering like how you're kind of striking a balance of trying to get someone closer to that while still getting them to kind of maintain just good striking under their center of mass going forward and being more fluid with it throughout the entire run, versus just trying to, like, you know, drive everything up and then everything else just looks kind of horrible.
Yeah, I think if you have, if they're delivering the force correctly, then, you know, you don't have to worry about that stuff. Like triple extension is, in good athletes, triple extension may occur on the first, like full extension may occur on the first push off the line, or maybe the second one. But by the time you get to the third stride, elasticity plays a bigger role. And so the elastic response will happen and you're off the ground before you have time to get to triple extension if you're doing it right. So I'm, certainly when we do like skipping drills and bounding drills, and we'll do like slower stuff and drills, like I'll say get to triple extension, right? But the idea is that you're creating an endpoint. So the end of that extension is your endpoint. And you're saying, okay, from flexion to extension, I want you to get there quickly, right? Now, even though your intent is to get to that triple extension, it doesn't mean it's going to happen that way, right? So it's like, like when you do martial arts, like try to punch, a few inches past the guy's face, right? Right. But you're going to hit the guy's face and you might not get to full extension. So I think it's the same in sprinting. Like your intent is to get to triple extension, but if you do it right and you hit the ground and you're off the ground quickly, you won't get to triple extension, right? So I think you just have to keep it in the back of your head that, like, as long as they're improving in terms of like their running times and even just, you'll see like, okay, yeah, that looks pretty good. And then when you slow it down, you'll see that, okay, they don't get to full extension, but they're off the ground quicker, right? Or the ground contact time shorter. So yeah, you have to kind of keep everything in balance and understand like, okay, is the idea to get to triple extension so I get a gold medal, or is the idea to win the race, right? And I think some people get caught up in like, some of these sort of false models of like, oh, we have to get to triple extension on every stride, and that's what a good sprinter looks like, right? But you'll see if they're a good sprinter, they're off the ground with still some degree of knee flexion. And then when they leave the ground and they're flying through the air, the recoil will be like they get to triple extension and then they recover through, but they're not pushing to triple extension off the ground. If you are, it means you're slow, right? Like Charlie Francis always told me, the idea is not to feel powerful, it's to be powerful. And if you feel like you're pushing and getting to extension, it means you're pushing too much, right? And you got to get onto the next stride. It's cyclical, right? So if I'm pushing too long with this leg, well, you're robbing the other leg a chance to get through the cycle. So I think you have to think about that balance, right? Your stride should look like this. It shouldn't look like this, right? It's not, you're not pushing out the back, right? You look like the road runner. Right?
Yeah, but road runner was fast though.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't triple extending, only his tongue.
Yeah, that's what I was realizing. Where I was like, oh, this like one moment or this like one snapshot looks really good where you're in quote unquote more of a triple extension. But like if you look at it more in context, it's like, oh well, everything else now looks worse because we're trying to get this one snapshot that is probably missing more of the big picture in terms of what we're looking for and like the qualities we're trying to train.
Yeah, and you'll see like in any like they'll use it in advertising a lot. Like they'll always, have a model come out and like, okay, we want you, we're going to get you out of the starting blocks. Like we're going to start your investments right. And then they have a guy coming out of the starting blocks and he's overextending. You're like, oh God, right. Don't start my investments that way. So yeah, it's you'll see bad examples of it, right, all the time, because they're being set up by people who don't understand.
100%.
So it's funny.
Cool.
Anything else, Rufus?
Well, I just got one more thing if you're done, and this is kind of a quick one. Going back to the NFL, you put up a series of posts about NFL injuries.
Yep.
And that was really good. The way you broke that down. Yeah. So I don't know how many guys they counted through that. I mean, what was there, 1,600 guys that are playing in the league at a time? And you said they went all back to training camp and, mini camp or whatever they call it. It seems like that ACL injuries aren't that prevalent. If you only had, what was it, 57, I think, total?
Yeah, 57. I guess I would say over the last 10 years, it's been everywhere between 32 all the way up to 63. So that's kind of the, it's somewhere between there. And if it counts training camp too, so there's guys who tear their ACL who never see the field or probably never were going to see the field.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of ACLs in special teams play. I think where it really starts to hit home is when your top players tear their ACL and they miss the season, and it really affects the outcome of the game. Or like a Tom Brady tearing his ACL at the beginning of a season, it's gonna hugely affect the Patriots, right, in that time. But if it's a guy who's like covering punts, they'll find another guy. So I think that's kind of why I think the NFL is kind of like, it's not that much of a problem, right? Until all their stars start missing time.
Well, I always thought there'd be a lot more of them, percentage wise. And after looking at that, what you were saying, it's I don't know what the percentage is, but it's not that big, I don't think. It doesn't, what, I don't know what percentage that is, 10% or something, maybe less than that.
Yeah, it's less. It's probably 5%.
Yeah, and it just, just the way everybody talks about it, I was just, I thought there was a lot more. And I went to our football coach yesterday, as a matter of fact, and said, "How many ACL injuries you had in the last couple of years?" He goes, "None." Oh, okay. I guess they're not that prevalent then.
Well, yeah, in the NFL, it works out to about two per team, right?
Yeah.
And I know, and then there were 16 Achilles tendon injuries. So of like season-ending injuries, that's up into it's getting closer to 70, right? 75, and then maybe there's other season-ending injuries like fractures and shoulder injuries, and might be 100. Like there might be 100 different things that end people's seasons, but that's still
pretty small,
still below 10%, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think there's enough players in the system so that it's next man up does still work.
Yeah.
Right. Because, a lot of the teams that did well this year had a lot of ACL, we're at the upper level, like had at least 3 ACL injuries. Right. So, 3 or 4, but I don't know. It's interesting. Like, could they be better? Yeah. If everybody trained hard in the off season, it'd probably be better, but not everybody does.
I was just, so do you think sprinting could help some of that? If they work more on sprinting? Or because or maybe it's more deceleration in the cut? Or,
I mean, it's that. It's I think I mean I would say yes, but my whole point would be like, if they're sprinting properly, that probably means they have a good, well-rounded program, right? They're not doing all this stupid stuff on the beach where they're like doing agility drills and chasing tennis balls on the beach, right? That's that's what you take your golden retriever to do. But I think they're missing out on sort of this well-rounded program, which would include sprinting. If somebody has sprinting in their program, probably means they're doing their due diligence, right? And they've got a good balanced program of sprinting, direction change, deceleration, plyos, lifting, right? Some sort of conditioning work. And then their diet's probably pretty good. So I think it's one of those things, like good training by association. So I don't know, you'd have to do some sort of audit of the guys who got hurt and, okay, well, what did you actually do? Survey them. Like, what did you do for off-season training? I think you'd have to do that kind of deep dive to figure out exactly what's going on.
Yeah. I was just curious. I was just shocked by the number. I thought it was pretty low, and I would think there would be more, a lot more. It just seemed like it. I don't know. So where'd you get those stats? Do you get those through your NFL contacts or?
A lot of it there is openly reported. Like you'll see after every week, you'll see like, okay, what the injuries were. It'll be posted.
Yeah.
A lot of the time it's posted on fantasy football sites because that impacts fantasy football.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, Lord, we'd hate to impact that.
yeah. So they have some of the better injury stats, right?
Yeah.
Because there's some money involved, right? So I think it's easy enough to find out. The things that I don't find out all the time would be like, the scenarios under which they happen. Like sometimes it's hard to figure out if it was contact versus non-contact.
Right.
And then contact, it officially a contact ACL would be like somebody getting hit in the leg or rolled up on in the leg, right? Where a non-contact could be like you're still wrestling somebody during a play and then you fall over, you twist your knee. That's officially a non-contact injury, even though you're in contact with somebody. So you'd have to have grades of like 0 contact with anybody, which is, Odell Beckham catching a pass and tearing his ACL in the Super Bowl, versus somebody who's engaged with somebody versus somebody who took a direct hit to the leg. You'd probably, have to find that out. And then I had to do a really extensive search of like, okay, where did each game occur? And then what kind of surface is in that stadium? Right. And then, what are the weather conditions, the temperatures, what kind of shoes are they wearing? What kind of cleats? Because that could have an influence. Like you could do a really exhaustive study if you wanted to. I don't know. Does the NFL, like you said, maybe there's not enough for the NFL to go, this is a real problem. We've got all this other stuff to deal with, right? They're taking bigger hits for other things, right? Like, not enough black head coaches, not enough diversity, not enough, whatever. So I think it's probably low on their priority list.
I just found it interesting. I'd never seen that before, and I just thought it was real interesting the way you did it. So
yeah, well, I mean, sometimes like because everybody's saying, "Oh, it's the turf, it's the turf, it's the turf," right?
See, that's what I always thought. And I'm old enough where if a horse can't eat it, I don't want to play on it.
Yeah.
Right? But we lost our when I was in college, we lost our best defensive back on turf, and it was or not on turf, on grass, and it was raining. And they used to say you never tear your ACL when it's raining or muddy because you're sliding. And here he returns a punt, makes a cut, and blows out his ACL.
Yeah, because the two fields that are indoor grass fields are the Arizona field and the Vegas field, Las Vegas, right? And those are the ones where they roll it out.
Yeah, right.
They grow it outside during the week, and then they roll it in for the game. Both of those had, I think, 3 or 4 ACL tears, right?
Yeah.
And there has been some complaints about that grass, so I don't know. Even the grass it's not like the grass that we grew up on. It's like some, cultured, genetically modified grass, like Kentucky bluegrass or Bermuda grass or whatever. So there's something like I was, I go down on the field after a game at Arrowhead and I'm on the grass and it's like, this looks like turf, man. You get in there, you're like digging around. You're like, this isn't grass. Like I can't grow this at home. Like, they have, amazing groundskeepers, I guess, but it looks like a golf green.
Yeah.
And it's not that torn up. You got 350-pound guys wrestling each other on this, and you're like, well, most of it's intact, right? So that's not grass. So who knows?
You said a couple of the places had a mixture of turf and grass.
Yeah, Green Bay and Philadelphia have something.
How does that work?
I can't remember what it's called, but it is a hybrid.
It's
a hybrid, and I'm like, okay, which tells me it's an artificial field. It's like, it would be like having a toupee with real hair growing through the toupee. It's like it's still a toupee, right? So You're still wearing a rug on your head. But yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
So
well, Derek, thank you very much for your time.
yeah,
And,
sorry. Thanks for having me on. I
really
got on a bit
appreciate
late, but thanks for having me,
Oh,
guys.
that's
And always
okay.
good
No,
talking to you.
that's no problem.
Hopefully
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hopefully I can see you guys in person soon.
God, I hope so. Please come and help our Colts, would you? Jeez.
Oh, where do we start?
Oh, jeez. I don't know. Hang on. Excuse me. That was bad. Cut that out, Corey. So tell us about your courses again and where they can buy them and how people can find you on the internet.
The best place to go is runningmechanics.com, and you'll see either the digital courses, the virtual courses, or hopefully some more in-person courses coming up for 2022 if I can make it across the border. And if they follow me on Instagram at Derek M Hansen, I'll usually have like updates on all of those things, like if there's a new course, and then there'll be like links to getting like coupons or savings on the courses as well. So I think
Maybe I'll
that's probably a good way to do it. Yeah, so I try to keep that up to date.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll send you through the sample so you can go through it.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. But anyway, it's great having you on again. Thanks for your time. I know you're a busy guy, and anytime you want, come help our Colts, would you please?